Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of the Lunchtime Learning webinar. My name is Brendan Woodruff. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the New York State DEC and one of the co-leads of the Green New York Council. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to join us here today on what I think is a very important topic. Before we get started today, a couple of housekeeping notes. Everybody is on mute when you join the webinar here today. If you have questions as we go along, please type them into the chat box. We will be getting to all questions at the end of the event, and we'll be asking them at the end, so please type them into the chat box. In addition, this event is being recorded and it will be posted on the Green New York website afterwards. So if you want to go back and see something you missed or share it with your coworkers or others, I'm going to post a link in the chat here so you'll be able to see that. On an upcoming scheduling note, our next Lunchtime Learning webinar is going to be Tuesday, October 10th, and that is going to feature sustainable forest products. So we've got a good one coming up there as well. And if you're just joining, we do have a poll going on. So if you can take the poll that's there, that way we can get some answers to those questions. And without further ado, I want to hand it over to DEC's Megan Boyce-Green.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully this will go okay. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I hope you can see my screen here. As Brendan mentioned, I do work for the Department of Environmental Conservation at a place called Rhinestone Woods Environmental Education Center. It is a full-service environmental education center located just outside of Buffalo. And during COVID, we started doing programming virtually for the public. And one of the things that we offered was a sustainability lunch talk series to help people make the changes that they need to make their lifestyles more sustainable. And so this talk today is one of those talks on how to divest from fossil fuels and invest in a clean energy future. But I think before we jump into that topic, I just want to spend a second explaining what we mean by sustainability. So unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware that burning fossil fuels, which is coal, oil, and gas, releases gases into the air that are causing our climate to change in ways that are bringing us really extreme weather. So from wildfires to the snow in Texas, this was my cousin's yard this past February in Houston, to flooding. This was a friend of mine's neighborhood in New Jersey after Hurricane Ida. So in order to keep these events from becoming even more common and extreme, the science is really telling us that we need to keep global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And to do that, we need to make some changes very, very quickly. We all need to get off of our addiction to coal, oil, and all forms of gas. And I've been an addict for my entire life, for 50 years, but I've been working hard on trying to address this addiction. And so in terms of our personal lives, I first want to say we need societal level change if we're going to accomplish this goal of keeping the planet livable for humanity. But in an individual way, we can have an impact by making changes in our own lives. So we need to stop worrying about things like whether we're using plastic straws. Not that those don't have an impact, but they aren't the big sources of fossil fuels in our lives. And so the big sources of fossil fuels that are going to help us really reach this goal of not warming the planet too much are looking at how we move ourselves around, how we heat and cool our homes, especially heat, where we get our electricity from, what we eat, and then the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is where we put our money. And so those are the topics that we call the big stuff. And that's what our sustainability sessions have focused on, helping people have the tools they need to change those parts of their lifestyle and move away from fossil fuel intense sources in those parts of your lifestyle. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how our money is part of the problem. I'm going to give you access to a resource sheet that we'll put in the chat box towards the end that will give you some of these tools that you can use to start making changes with your own finances. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation. Brendan will be monitoring the chat box and there'll be time for questions at the end. I do want to mention this is not formal investment advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm actually trained as an ecologist. But again, our goal is really just to help you understand the problem and give you some tools to address this issue in your own life. So why does it matter where we put our money? So there's a lot of really good science that has been telling us we need to keep the fossil fuels that are currently in the ground in place. And there was a study as recently as last week that came out that said most of what's currently in the ground we need to keep in the ground if we want to stay within that 1.5 degree Celsius carbon budget. The scary thing I think about this study that came out last week is they said, you know, we need to keep this much of the oil and gas underground if we want to just have a 50% probability of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's a pretty staggering statistic. And if you heard about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report that came out in July, it was often referred to in the media as the Code Red report. They gave a bunch of different scenarios that would get us to that limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And as you can see in all of these different scenarios, the gray part is fossil fuels and fossil fuel extraction. And you can see we need a drastic drop by 2050, 2060 if we're going to keep our planet livable. And I think Bill McKibben said it much easier or much simpler. If you don't know who Bill McKibben is, please Google him. But he said, we will overwhelm the planet's physical systems if we don't stop removing the fossil fuels from the ground. And so it's not a we should do this, it's a we have to do this. And so that applies not just to the US, but around the world. There's large sources of fossil fuels that have yet to be tapped in various places, including in the Arctic, Canada, various places where there's still a lot of coal. And then Eastern Europe, there's believed to be a large area that hasn't yet been fracked that could be. And so investors need to start looking at, gee, should we really be funding development of these untapped fossil fuel sources? And more really respected agencies are coming out and saying we need to just stop now. And so that kind of brings us back to you and I. What do we have to do with, you know, this kind of development? And the short answer is we do have a little tiny bit to do with it. And I'm going to show you a way oversimplified document or diagram that explains how it is that our money may be contributing to this. So when you take your money and you put it in a bank, and not just a checking and savings account, but a loan, a mortgage, when you use your credit card, and if you buy stocks or mutual funds, that money can go to be loaned to a company that is extracting fossil fuels and selling them, which then they make a profit off of. The bank gets some of that profit back, and then they may or may not give you some of that profit in the form of dividends and interest. And so there's a good chance that your money is in some way being used in this cycle of funding fossil fuel development and extraction. So what can we do about it? Well, there's three things that we can do. And I'm going to give you some resources to help you take all three of these steps and talk about them in a little more detail. So I'm going to start with the first one, which is to look at where you're doing your banking. So it would help to know which banks are funding fossil fuel extraction. And I want to start with a little caveat, which is if you're doing your banking with a credit union or a small local bank, and by small and local, I mean a bank that has, you know, maybe 4 or 5 different branches in an area, there's a good chance that they're not involved with any development on a major scale. They may be giving a loan to the local, you know, propane delivery guy to buy a new truck, but they're not funding major new pipelines. Regional banks sometimes do get involved with pipeline development, but they're probably not involved with any of these major development projects around the world. But there is an organization that has been tracking for about a dozen years which banks are funding fossil fuel extraction, and that's the Rainforest Action Network. And so they've been issuing this report every year showing what banks are funding fossil fuel development globally. And as you can see from this chart of the top 12 banks, the top 4 banks are all major US banks. Morgan Stanley down here at number 12 is another one. There's also 2 other banks I'll mention on this list. One is BNP Paribas. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. It's a French bank, but they have a wholly owned US subsidiary called Bank of the West. And then TD Bank is a Canadian bank, but they have a pretty big American presence. And so I would just mention those 2 banks as well. So these are the guys that are really leading the way in terms of funding fossil fuel development and extraction worldwide. But people are starting to put pressure on these banks to stop some of this development. And in the last year and a half or so, a whole bunch of banks have announced that they're going to not drill in the Arctic because of the public pressure that's been put on them around this issue. But I think this headline from the Washington Post really sums it up well. We need to be looking beyond the baby steps of stopping Arctic extraction. So to give you an example of why this is a baby step, so in February of 2020, JP Morgan Chase announced that they were going to stop funding Arctic oil exploration and coal-fired power plant development, new coal-fired power plants. And in 2019, right before they made that announcement, they had spent $1 billion on coal plant development and 377 on Arctic oil and gas. In contrast, they spent 6.8 billion on offshore oil and gas and 2 billion on tar sands development. So really for them, this was a baby step. And the public pressure on them has continued. So in October of 2020, they pledged to set some targets to meet the Paris Accord. Unfortunately, when they came out with their plan on how they were going to meet that pledge, it used what's called carbon intensity instead of carbon emissions to meet that pledge. So it's kind of the best way I've heard it described is sort of an accounting trick that lets them continue to fund new fossil fuel development and new sources of emissions while claiming that they're meeting the Paris Agreement. So there's a lot more that's needed with these banks to really get them to take concrete action to stop this kind of development. So what we can do as individuals is to start by making a list of our banks. And I put these 2 credit cards up just because these are 2 that I personally had. When I heard about this issue a couple years ago, I started to look into, what credit cards did I have? The one on the left is an example of where it's really easy to figure out what bank issued your credit card. The one on the right is a store credit card. And a lot of times with store credit cards, you have to flip it over and look at the little print on the back, or you have to look at your statement to figure out what bank is giving me this credit. And even if you're paying your credit card bill off in full every single month, so you never pay fees, the bank is making some money off of those transactions. They're charging the merchants a fee for that transaction. So anyway, so you can look and see where your credit cards are issued from. Look them up, see if they're a major funder of fossil fuel development, and then make changes. And when you make those changes, tell the bank why. When I called the credit card company and said, I'm not going to use your card again until you take action to stop investing in fossil fuel development, so that they have an idea of why you're putting this pressure on them. There's also a resource that I'll give you at the end where there are some credit cards that specifically focus on environmental issues and trying to address issues related to climate change. So I'll give you a resource related to that as well near the end. So that's a look at the banking side of things. But you may have investments, you may have stocks, or you may just have your New York State pension, you may be in the deferred comp program. So in those situations, you could be holding some stocks in the companies that are doing the fossil fuel removal and extraction. The good news for New York State employees is that I believe it was December of 2020, the New York State Pension Fund did announced that they're going to divest from fossil fuel stocks within 5 years. That was because of a public pressure campaign called #DivestNewYork. But a whole bunch of other organizations have been realizing that this is not a good long-term investment. And so groups like the Irish Catholic Church have completely divested. In fact, a lot of religious organizations have divested. A lot of foundations are divesting. CNBC's Mad Money host Jim Cramer announced that he will no longer purchase or recommend fossil fuel stocks because he feels they're a bad investment, that they're too risky. And even billionaires like Bill Gates have divested from fossil fuels. So you may be saying, well, all I own are a few mutual funds, you know, those have tons of stocks in them. How do I know if I'm funding fossil fuel extraction or development? So if you can bear with me, I'm going to switch over and share a quick 1-minute video. I just want to make sure I do this right so that you guys can hear everything. It's not giving me the option to add sound. I don't know why. I'm going to stop and try that again. Yeah, I don't know why it's not giving me the little button where I can say, make sure you share my audio. So Brendan, you're going to have to let me know if you guys can hear this or not. Hold on. All right, I'm going to try playing this, see if you can hear it. Can you hear that?
No, I can't, unfortunately.
I don't know why it's not giving me the little button to share my audio. Hold on. I apologize that this is not working. Well, anyway, I wanted to show you a video. I can try it in the PowerPoint, but that usually doesn't work well either. But it's only letting me share content and not sound for some reason. All right, I'm just going to try it here. See if you can hear it, and if not, I'll just explain. Can you hear this one?
No, I can't hear this one either.
Darn technology. Well, let me explain what's happening while you watch this little girl standing there. So basically what it's explaining is that there's a site that you can go to and you can put your fossil fuel, or excuse me, your mutual fund names into that site, and you can find out what's in those mutual funds. So you can put the fund name in, and it'll tell you if your money's invested in fossil fuels. So then you can talk to your retirement advisor and ask them to offer some fossil-free investments. So I wish I could have you actually hear the audio, but basically it's all about becoming happy because you go fossil-free. So I apologize for the technical difficulties. But basically what you can do is you can make a list of your mutual funds and you can look them up on fossilfreefunds.org and then use that as a tool to help you make some changes. And I'll show you an example. So my husband owned some mutual funds through his 403B, and the mutual fund company that his 403B was using was sold to a company called Delaware. So we went to Fossil Free Fuels and looked up Delaware to see what the options were. And as you can see, just from that one company, the different funds that they offer got very different fossil fuel grades by this site. And there's a methodology that they use to give it a score from A to F. There's also a bunch of other screening tools that you can use if you're interested. And on the site, you can read all about those different screening tools. But this we found very helpful because then we were able to say, okay, we'd prefer to have our money in funds that got an A rating, so we could go and explore the prospectus for each of these different funds and decide where to invest our money. Now, the Fossil Free Funds website lets you sort by all different kinds of things, so that if there's just a certain kind of fund that you're interested in, or you can make a decision about what fossil fuel grade you're willing to accept and filter so you just see funds with that grade or higher. They also have filters for deforestation and gender equality. Both of those topics are very closely related to climate change. I'm not going to go into the why, that's a topic for a different webinar, but those are other screening tools that you can use, and you can read a little more about those screening tools on the Fossil Free Fuels website. The other nice feature is if you scroll down to the bottom of their homepage, they have sections for all of the major asset managers that are out there. So if you're currently invested, say with Fidelity, you could go and learn more just about what Fidelity offers, what their current fossil fuel exposure is, that kind of thing. So they have some really good planning tools on this website. So you might look at your retirement plan and be like, gee, all of the mutual funds that are offered have a large amount of fossil fuel exposure. What do I do? Well, you can go and talk to your retirement plan manager and ask them to add some new options, to add what are commonly called socially responsible investments, or SRIs, or environmental, social, and corporate governance funds, or ESGs. And there are a couple of tools to help you have that conversation. Because I do think, I'm not young, but I'm not that old. And we're talking about making these changes very quickly so that we can have a nice retirement, and not a retirement where we're always worried about, whether we're going to be able to produce enough food or survive the next extreme storm because our climate has changed so much. So you can use a couple of online tools to help you talk to your employer or your retirement advisor. One is called divestinvest.org. And again, this is all going to be on the resource sheet that we'll give you. What I like about this website in particular is it gives some good financial arguments for why this just makes good investment sense. And I'm going to give another example of that at the end. And then the fossilfreefunds.org site also offers this Fossil Free Action Toolkit, which can help you again with these conversations with your employer or your retirement advisor. There's a whole video on there where they talk to some people who've gone through this process, and some benefits managers who've gone through this process of adding some options to their retirement offerings. Since most people on this call are New York State employees, I do want to talk a little bit about the New York State Deferred Compensation Program and what they offer in this arena. They currently offer one fund that they advertise as being a socially responsible investment fund, and that's the PAX Global Environmental Markets Institutional Fund. That gets an A rating on the Fossil Free Funds website. There are a few other offerings from Deferred Comp that get B ratings. But they also offer something called a self-directed investment account, which you may or may not already be familiar with, but I just want to talk about it for a minute because it is a good option if you are interested in going to fossil-free investing. So basically what this is you set up an account with Charles Schwab. That is the broker that the Deferred Compensation Program has chosen to use. And it's something called a personal choice retirement account. And then this gives you access to more than 3,000 different mutual funds and exchange traded funds that Charles Schwab offers. And there's a whole bunch of those that are fossil free. And Charles Schwab actually has a tool to help you narrow down that list of 3,000 to, I think it's about 300 to choose from. There are some requirements in terms of how much money you have in deferred comp, how much you can move there. And you do have to sort of move the money back and forth between the deferred comp account and the Charles Schwab account to actually access the money. But all of those details are spelled out in a really nice handbook that the Deferred Compensation Program put together that explains all the details of the program. And I'll give you that reference and show it to you in a moment as well. So this is a good option, again, if you want to have a diversified portfolio, but you want to have things be fossil free. In terms of investing, if you are a sophisticated investor, another resource that you might find handy is the S&P offers a S&P 500 fossil fuel free index. So this is a place where you can go to look for stocks and funds that are fossil fuel free. As you can see, they've done quite well this year. So that's on the resource list as well. And so the last step that I really want to talk to you about is becoming an advocate for this issue. In addition to talking to friends and family and your retirement plan, if you're involved with any sort of nonprofit that has an investment account, so most churches have investment accounts, a lot of social organizations have investment accounts. You can talk to them about this issue and about changing over, trying to divest from fossil fuels and investing for a clean energy future. And I like to give this as an example of an investment policy. The Wallace Global Fund is a really big organization, but they post their investment policy right on the web. And one thing that I like about it is, in addition to having a policy that says they'll be 100% free from fossil fuels, they also have a specific target for investing in clean energy solutions. And there are some tools even on the Fossil Free Funds website about which companies you could invest in that are working on climate solutions. I'm really proud to say that Friends of Rhinestone Woods, which is the nonprofit support group for Rhinestone Woods Environmental Education Center, just finished divesting from fossil fuels. And I'll explain a little bit about what sort of pushed them to that. They had started investing with an environmental social governance fund a few years ago, but they only had a portion of their investments in that fund. And they asked their investment advisor to do some research and give them some information about how their portfolio would look if they went to a 0% fossil fuel structure. So they basically looked at 0%, 2%, and 4% fossil fuel exposure. And their current investments were 4% fossil fuel exposure. And what they discovered was, if they would have made this change 3 years ago, they would have made more money by being invested in a 0% fossil fuel portfolio with only a 0.7% increase in risk. So that was enough to convince them that they should go to a 0% fossil fuel portfolio. So it is something that even small groups can do. It may not be, billions of dollars, but I think every little bit counts, and it starts to show the markets that this is an important issue. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to show you the resource list. And Brendan, if you want to put it in the chat, you can now, and you also could start asking me questions while I try to switch over to the other technology.
So I'm going to put the resource list here in the chat box for everybody. I'm also going to put a link there to where you can find a recording of this afterwards, so you can share it with folks that you might want to show it with. And I just want to say, first off, thank you for presenting today. I think this is an important topic, and it's one that, a lot of times, especially in these webinars, we've talked about what can we do from a personal standpoint and an individual standpoint. And, it's great to make those changes. I think that they do a lot of good. We know that sustainability actions are contagious. When somebody does one, others are more apt to follow in their footsteps. But this is one where the individual action has collective action as well, where it's pushing the market, it's pushing things to go in a different direction in a way that other individual actions don't. So I think this is a really powerful one. And again, none of this is investment advice. These are tools for you to take a look at and think about. But, I just want to thank you for presenting so clearly on this and giving folks the resources they need, because I think this is a really powerful tool for folks if they're thinking about where to spend their time making individual actions against climate change.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate the invite too. So let me just explain a little bit. So this is what the resource sheet looks like. And if you're not comfortable downloading a Google Doc, you can shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send you a PDF version of this as well. So it just starts at the top with a little chart to get you started with thinking about, where your money currently is. But then there's a series of resources. So first is the Rainforest Action Network, their website, and also a link to their actual climate report. I'll show you their website quick. I'm not as crazy about it. They changed it this year, but it has a lot where you can actually can go and explore the data. So it has some charts and things, but you can go down here and say, oh, I'm really most interested in Arctic oil and gas or fracking. And you can look at charts just of that kind of investment. And it includes not just those top 12 banks, but a whole bunch of major banks. So you can see, who's been investing in what on their website and explore the data if you're interested. And then underneath that is links to the Fossil Free Funds site and the S&P 500 Fossil Fuel Free Index. I will go back here just to show you what the Fossil Free Funds website looks like. You can just, again, type in your fund name if you have a mutual fund, or its ticker name is a good way to do it because then you avoid any typing errors. They are picky. Like if you put in a T. Rowe Price, if you put in T. Rowe Price, you have to include the period or it will tell you they don't have any T. Rowe Price funds listed on their site when they actually do. Or you can just click on top scoring funds and see a list of different funds that get an A rating. So that's the Fossil Free Funds main website. And then there's some information about how to divest yourself. There's the Divest Invest website that I mentioned. This is what it looks like. It has, a real nice sort of step-by-step how to divest, and then it gives way more resources even than I've given you on this website. Another website that is on the resource list for you is a few different links to Green America. And there's one about credit cards. It starts with an ad for their credit card. But if you go past that, it actually has links to a bunch of other credit cards. And then facts about credit cards, comparisons of credit cards, that kind of thing. So it's a nice site to explore, and again, you don't have to get their credit card. That's just what they put at the top of their web page. And so let me see if, oops, oh dear. Another website that I'll just show you is Divest Invest for Organizations. And so this link is also on the resource sheet. Again, it has a nice step-by-step, lots of good, helpful information. And then if I can move my little thing out of the way here so I can show you some other sites. At the bottom of the resource sheet, there is the information for if you're participating in deferred compensation. This is the self-directed investment account handbook. Again, it really is I found it to be pretty nice guide in terms of explaining how those account works, what the fees are, how you move your money back and forth, that kind of thing. And then Charles Schwab, there's two links to Charles Schwab. The first is this page where they just sort of explain social responsible investing and give a little information about that. And then they do have their website that lists all of their socially conscious funds. And so these are organized by the type of investment fund, which is really nice because if you know what types of investments you're interested in having, it helps you find some that you can then research some more and determine which ones you might be, interested in investing in. So I'm going to stop sharing this. Are there questions, Brendan? I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so
I know I talked really fast.
One question here for you.
Okay.
Oh, no, I mean, that was a lot of information, and I think it's great for people to be able to have that. So one question here is, Do you have any resources for folks on finding a green financial advisor or planner? I know that this is a relatively new area of finance and not all advisors might be up to speed on it. So is there anything in how to help people find somebody to help them navigate this?
Boy, that is a great question. And I don't know, there's probably an association by now of like financial advisors who do that. There are financial advisors out there that do specialize in this. That is who our little nonprofit is using, is a very small local company that specializes in responsible investing. But I can look into that and maybe share that if they want to drop their name in the chat or whatever. But that's a great question. I will say I have looked at some of the major brokerage houses, and some of them have more transparent information about this than others. Charles Schwab actually has quite a bit on there. So they're definitely one that has, worked on this issue. But you could, I think it helps, again, it's that question of driving market forces. It can help to ask your local advisor about this. I think at this point, most advisors are at least familiar with the concept of ESG and SRI funds, but whether they're experienced in being able to help you navigate that is probably going to depend. So. But yeah, that's a great question.
And so you mentioned the state pension fund. Do you know anything about the New York State Teachers Retirement Fund or the New York City Employees Retirement Funds? And are they making the same divestment journey that the State Retirement Fund is?
I don't know. I think New York City is, because I believe I did see an article about that, but I don't know about the Teachers Retirement Fund. I would assume since they're being managed by the same comptroller's office that they are, but I don't know. But that's a good question. Another one I should look into.
Okay. And then another kind of follow-up question on that is, so there's the public pension funds, but there are still some companies out there that have private pension funds, and people might have spouses or others that work for companies that still offer one. Do you know if there's any public resources that show how private pension funds are managed, or is that something that the employee would have to ask their company?
Yeah, you'd need to ask your company. A lot of the major public pension funds have been moving in this direction. California, I believe, has done the same as New York, and I think they did it first. But when it comes to the private pensions, it'd be a question for that, for the pension managers.
And we did just have a comment come in saying that the teachers' retirement system is not divested yet.
Okay.
So that is an area that if you do know somebody who works and is a member of that retirement system and they're interested in this issue, where they could make their voice heard.
Yep. And again, the Divest New York or Divest Invest website is a good one to start. There's also a resource that I didn't mention. There's two resources I forgot to mention that are on the resource sheet. One is called gofossilfree.org, and that's an organization that has information on their website about how to start a divestment campaign. And then the other one is one called greenfaith.org. As I mentioned, a lot of religious organizations have gotten involved with this issue. And so they include on their website, links to I would say all of the major religions. There's a list of different Christian organizations that are working on this issue, Jewish organizations that are working on this issue, and then they have kind of case studies on Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist efforts to divest. So those two would be good resources to look at as well.
And let me just check. If anybody does have any final questions, please type them into the chat box now. And there's one here. So when you mentioned the ESG funds, do you know anything about the SEC's recent crackdown on having fund managers more clearly define the rules of what ESG means and avoiding potential misleading claims?
Yeah, I don't. I have heard rumblings about that issue. And I think, that is where a site like the Fossil Free Funds can help, because they don't just look at the claims, they look at the actual investments that these funds are making. And they have tools even beyond their own rating system. As I mentioned, some of those other categories are other organizations or other projects that have looked at these mutual funds in different ways. So that can be a good way to deal with that potential for I don't know if greenwashing is the right word, but that potential for somebody claiming to be an ESG fund, but maybe still investing in things that you wouldn't consider to be appropriate for an ESG fund.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I just want to say, do you have any final things to leave folks with today?
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention two things. First is that everybody's journey to sustainability will be different. This is a process. It does take some work. So it can help to set a date. So what I have done is tried to put like on my planner, okay, I'm going to do this research by this date, and then maybe set a date by which you want to make a change. And we're in September, maybe say, okay, by New Year's Eve, I want to be able to say, okay, I've gone fossil free with my finances. And also, I'd encourage people to share your experience. And Brendan's going to put in the chat, there's a quick 4-question survey that we'd love it if you could answer, that will help us to improve future programs. You can put, there's a couple comment boxes on there where you could put if you had suggestions or things that you would like to see covered that weren't covered today. I also want to mention we will be doing the Sustainability Lunch Talk series again this winter. We'll be announcing the dates in mid-November. So that will cover the issues of how you heat your home, transportation, food, and electricity. So it's one program per week usually. You can check the Rhinestone Woods website or shoot us an email and say, hey, I want to be notified when the dates are announced for the Sustainability Lunch Talk series. And we'll be happy to help you with trying to make changes in these other major fossil fuel areas. But I do appreciate everybody participating today, and good luck with your journey. And I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah. And do you want to just hit
yeah,
end
let me
on the record?
stop.
Yeah.
There we go.